everybody. My name is Anneliese Harmon, and I have been in the music industry for nearing 30 years. I've been supporting myself and my family in music for all of that time. And I met Yaz when I was the general manager, the GM of the Music Managers Forum, which is a post I held for almost 2.5 years. And he was one of our accelerators, which was a management development course that program that we ran with granting. And during those, we have different people talk about their experience. I did one, and I told my story and my journey. And Yaz, who's one of the people that inspires me the most, said that he was really inspired by it, as had other people who were in the accelerator program. So much so that even like 3 years after I gave this, people still call me to speak and do wonderful things like this. So I'm really, really happy to be here. And I wanted to talk about a journey that I've had as somebody that's worked on the other side of the industry. I'm not an artist. I am a person that works alongside artists. I've worked at record labels. I've done film production with artists. I've worked with trade and industry organizations. I'm currently a co-chair for, of all things, the Scottish Music Industry Association. The main reason why I'm doing that is that Black music and music of color is underrepresented there, and I really wanted to make sure that I had a voice and was a part of the change that needs to happen up north. And I'm also a part of the Equality Diversity Advisory Group for Creative UK. And we work hard with Creative UK to make change within the UK. So I've dedicated this part of my life to making meaningful change within the UK music industry. And I also do back and forth with the US. So I was thinking about what I could talk about and how I could make this all make sense. And I think that a big important issue that I'm noticing in the music industry, that is something that I wanted to actually have a discussion with people at the beginning of their careers. People have different ideas as to what success in the music industry means. And having that idea straight in your head at the very beginning will significantly affect the choices that you make in life and how you will find yourself motivated to continue, so that you could, be up here talking to a next generation saying, I've been doing this for 30 years and I've been supporting myself for 30 years. And the music industry is in such a state of flux right now. Everything that was true last year is not true this year. Things are rapidly changing. Success is rapidly changing, but certain key things that I've noticed have remained consistent throughout my whole 30-year career. And I wanted to talk about my career and then talk about some key things that I found that are the foundations of things that have not changed, that perhaps you could use to make your decisions. The first thing that I wanted to ask is, how do you define success in the music industry, or what is your idea of what is success in the music industry? And that's a really important question, because it will be the motivation that drives you to push harder and to do what you need to do in a very competitive field and industry. And another thing I wanted to talk about is, do you consider yourself solely musicians and solely creatives, or do you consider yourselves entrepreneurs and business people? And this is a really important conversation to have in 2024, because the way things are going now, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, are things that you've seen in movies that have represented themselves as to how people are discovered. They have this whole record label behind them, helping them, opening up all these doors and doing things. That does not exist anymore. I was there when it was existing. I was a part of those teams. We found people at very early stages in their careers, and we developed them and helped them figure out who they are. But now the way it is, that's all done internally. That's all done by the artists. That's all done by the teams. So as an artist, as was mentioned in the previous discussion, a lot of the business that was done previously by the savior, the record label, the publisher, whatever you want to call it, is done by you and the people that you choose to work with. And this is like a very real realization. And I always talk to artists now and managers and people that they work with. I always said, you're entrepreneurs, you're not just artists, you're artistic, creative entrepreneurs. And that means that you're going to figure it out and you're going to keep on going. And if something doesn't work, you're going to figure it out and you're going to keep on going. And that's a consistent reality in this industry. And the people that have made it, even from, the old school people, I saw Nas last night at Royal Albert Hall. He's been doing, his first album came out 30 years ago. And here he is standing at the Royal Albert Hall with an orchestra of like about 60 people behind him. But he is still here. Number one, he's alive. Number two, he's not in jail. Number three, he doesn't have any scandals. And number four, the most interesting thing is in that audience, there weren't just people my age. The biggest group of people in that audience were probably your age. And that's a sustainable career. And that's what everybody should want to achieve. So who am I? Why am I up here talking to you? And why do I think I have the answers and the knowledge? I just wanted to talk about what I did and how I decided to start in being into music. Many, many years ago, as you can tell by my accent, I'm American. I was born and raised in New York. Always loved hip hop, always loved music. My parents were always into music. And when I was in university, my crew and I used to always go to hip hop clubs. And back in the day, they were like the young, cute girls, come in for free, drink for free, hang out at our clubs. And we said, well, wait a second, if we're a part of the draw, why don't we start our own club? So we created our own club, a bunch of girls. We were the only girls doing our own club. Another person named Jessica Rosenblum was doing a club, but she was doing it with somebody called P. Diddy back in the day. But we were the only all-girl crew doing a club. And we had the same DJs. We went to everybody else's clubs, handed out flyers, and started things going, and it ticked us over, made us some extra cash, got us in touch with the music industry crowd. We started building a community. And one night at one of the club nights, I was like sitting there and everybody came to our night. Russell Simmons, who had just started his career and he started a company called Def Jam, he was there and I was just talking to him at our night and I was like, what's going on at the label? And he said, oh, we're doing a record release party for a band called Public Enemy. These are all names that are probably like your parents know, but these are important stories to tell. And I said, well, where are you doing it? And he's like, well, probably Jessica and Puffy are doing it. And I said, well, why don't you do it here with us? And he had been drinking, and it was a case of being at the right time at the right place. And he said, yeah, sure. And I said, word is bond, held out my hand, shook the hand. And in our culture, when you do that, that deal is sealed, whether it's a mistake, whatever, the deal was sealed. We ended up getting the Public Enemy, Fear of a Black Planet record release party. And that was our first multi-$1,000 check from a record label. And we ended up doing that party. It was the biggest thing we did, but it was the first time I realized how much money could be made in the music industry and how other parts of it were important to maintaining an artist, creating buzz around the artist, and creating a community. So that was the first step. The second step in the music industry was I had gone into fashion. One of my friends was starting a new company that has turned into Supreme now, but in the very beginning, he was out in the car park selling T-shirts at the flea market, and he had met an English group that had just signed a record deal and were in the US doing promotion. He invited me to go out with them for dinner. I went out with them for dinner, really liked what they were doing. They were doing British hip hop, which I had never heard of. They called it trip hop. It was something that was very different than what we were doing. It was from a small town that I had never heard of called Bristol, and ended up becoming friends with them. Um, and they're the main reason why I moved to the UK. So I moved to the UK to work with and to spend time with Massive Attack. And I spent 10 years touring and watching their career grow from being unknown people who had known and worked with other artists like Soul to Soul. Nana Cherry was their manager. I don't know if many people know this. And they ended up at the time getting the biggest record deal of any new artist in the history of British music. What happened was one of their managers ended up stealing the money, but that's another story in another book. But it was a real interesting education in seeing how a group from a non-traditional incubation center, when we always thought of music in England, we always thought of London, but here was a community in Bristol that had just started on its own, and they still live in Bristol. They never moved to London. They never moved to New York, and they created something that had global impact and impacted some of the biggest artists in the world. Dr. Dre is inspired by Portishead and Massive Attack. Madonna is inspired by Massive Attack. But by staying true to themselves and staying in their own community, they ended up creating something that impacted the world. And it's another show and prove story. Okay, so I moved here with them, ended up really enjoying my time there, but it was really hard for a New Yorker to live in Bristol back in the 90s. So I wanted to move to London, but it was like, where do I go in London? Who is the Russell Simmons of London? Asked everybody, networked everybody. Everybody said, oh, that's Richard Branson. Richard Branson is the closest thing to a Russell Simmons. And Richard Branson at that time was starting a brand new record label called V2. He had Virgin. He had sold Virgin to EMI to save his airline, which was failing. He had a gardening leave, which meant he couldn't get into the music industry for a certain number of years. When that ended, he started a record company called V2. They couldn't call it Virgin. There was already a Virgin, so it was called V2. The first act that V2 signed, they were all like rock and indie acts. But then they bought a record label in America that was a Black music label and a Black American music label. And I was brought in to I was hired as a press and promotions person, very entry level, starting off, and that was my first step into working for a music label. And yeah, it was an indie, but it was an indie with major funding. So when we opened up in 12 countries worldwide. We had a multimillionaire funding it as the head. We had budgets that were comparable to the majors. We would book private jets to move certain A-list artists around. It was like it wasn't an indie in a traditional way. But when they bought this record label, what they found was that a lot of the American artists did not want to come to the UK because when they came here, they felt like there was a disconnect. So they went out looking for somebody to be the head of global marketing. And in a typical New York fashion, I went to the head of the company and said, while you're looking, because I work with these artists sometimes as a press assistant, while you're looking, can I get the experience and do the job while you're looking? When you find somebody, I'll go back to press. And I had no experience doing global marketing, but he said, sure. And 5 years later, I was still head of Black music global marketing for the label. They ended up getting me my work visa, which led to my passport, which is how I'm still here all of these years later. I ended up working with artists like Jungle Brothers, who did Native Tongues. Native Tongues was a Tribe Called Quest and De La Soul and that whole scene. And another artist I got to work with was an artist named RZA, who was from Staten Island and was the leader of the Wu-Tang Clan. I've been around the world. So I worked on RZA's, so we originally worked with RZA when he had a group called Gravediggers, who were signed to the label that we bought, and then he had his first solo record, and that was, there was a bidding war globally for that. We ended up paying a very high sum in cash, that's all I will say, to get it. It was on the back of Wu-Tang having their first #1 global album, the one that Gravel Pit was on. And I ended up getting to work with RZA on his solo album. He recorded some of the album in the UK. We got to tour it throughout Europe. We had special guests like ODB come out on the tour. Those are long stories that I'll tell some night. But again, another genius person who created a scene out of Staten Island. Everybody forgets they're not from Manhattan, they're from Staten Island, which is very different from Manhattan. Creating a stream of, creating their own style of music that created global impact. RZA from day one always had an idea of what his career path was going to look like. And it almost seemed delusional when I first met him, because it hadn't happened yet. But his visions were always big and global. And yeah, I'm going to release this, and everybody else is going to have their own little empires, but there's going to be one empire. We're going to stay together. We're going to be solid. We're going to create brands that are going to be noticed, throughout the world. And again, it was like, yeah, you're from Staten Island. This is what a New Yorker would say, a Manhattanite would say to a Staten Islander. There was quite like, but it happened, and years later, they had just had a huge tour. They just played Las Vegas. I think they were the first hip hop group to have a residency in Las Vegas. And this is another group that has sustained and created, logos that, even if you're 19, you'll know the Wu-Tang logo. Even if you're 19, you'll know the Public Enemy logo with, the silhouette of a black man inside of a sniper sight. Yeah, you'll know the Massive Attack logo, which is the flame. These are like creating things that are sustainable. And these people have careers as, I don't know how old they all are now, but they've created careers that have affected other people and have launched careers. And when I first met RZA, he said, I'm going to make your career. Working with me is going to change your career. And, I'm still talking about working with him years later. And occasionally when we see each other, we nod. And I haven't worked with him since those 3 albums. But the fact that I did get to work with him, and the lessons that I learned, and the fact that I could see that your belief from a very small incubation period can become a reality is a message that is really important, that I try to share with as many people as I can. So after V2 ended up running for 10 years. Probably some of our biggest success in the UK would be like Stereophonics. We had Tom Jones. We had Estelle, who is another sustainable success story. You remember she was dropped from a label in the UK. People had written her off. She moves to the US. She pulls together all of the stuff that she's been working on herself, meets people within her community, John Legend, will.i.am, bumps into Kanye West at Roscoe's, which is a soul food restaurant in LA, walks up to him and says, "My name is Estelle. I'm an artist from England. We know similar people. We should get in the studio together." What happens a year after she gets dropped? She wins a Grammy and has that one record that will sustain her and her family for life. That's one of those golden records that every artist wants to have, records like that will always bring in income. And even now, she's still finding other ways. She still tours a lot. She does animation for one of those big animation brands. She plays Gem. She has an Apple TV show, Apple radio show, which is really popular, which she got together during COVID. Again, another sustainable, long-term artist who didn't stop and kept on going. So that was V2. V2 sold. I ended up getting a payout check. And with that payout check, I decided to start a management company. There was an artist that I really believed in. She was making music that I felt was very relevant at the time. We did a deal with Ministry of Sound. We had a #1 dance hit, and we ended up touring it and working with it for a couple of years around the world. She would end up making between 3,000 and 5,000 for one song, and we would do 2 or 3 gigs a night with a driver. And one of the gigs that we had was in Miami, and they had all of these billboards for her. And the next thing we know, we get a phone call from somebody saying his name is Slim Williams from Cash Money, and he wanted to talk to us about doing a deal because he had had success with an artist named Jay Sean, and he was looking for another British artist that could perhaps fit into that mold. And we did lots of conversations with them, spent lots of time with them, didn't end up doing the deal because the deal wasn't advantageous for us. We wouldn't have owned anything. They would have owned everything. We would have had to have moved to Miami. Later conversations, now what you hear what happened with Lil Wayne and with other artists that were signed to Cash Money, it wasn't the right deal. It wasn't so we made the right decision for us. Ran my own management company, worked with other artists like Ruby Go, who I don't know if you know, worked with producers, did consulting for people like Dallas Austin, who was a big producer in the US, TLC, Madonna, Kanye, and Rihanna. Ended up doing consulting with the management of Migos when they came over and when they were having their big run. Everything was going fine. When you talked about everybody wants to get your deal with Adidas, I ended up doing a deal with Puma with an unknown artist that was bigger than any record deal that we had. It was a 6-figure deal. Ended up paying for all of our touring, all of our recording, all of our videos. They gave us a clothing line and a jewelry line, and it was non-recoupable. So they just handed us the check. We were completely unknown. It was just being at the right place at the right time, and what they wanted to find something that was organic. And when that happened, I was like, wait a second, this isn't recoupable, and it's more than the record labels are giving us. I want to create a business where I only work with artists who are highly marketable and are really brand friendly. So I ended up looking for artists that had a certain commercial appeal and doing development deals with them, working with brands. So I did deals with Qantas Airlines, Gucci Group, Triumph, which is a lingerie company, MAC. I did do a deal with Adidas as well. But not as big as the Puma deal. And things were going fantastic, and years go by, and I didn't end up hiring other people. I ran what was called a black book business, where I would bring on freelancers and consultants as I needed them. So if I needed a promo person or if I needed a TV person, I would hire them for the project, but I wouldn't make them my responsibility to have them as an employee. And that's something I will talk about later on in this conversation as to whether or not that's the right thing. And everything was going wonderfully. And next thing I know, my accountant says, you've made it past 10 years. And I'm living in Fitzrovia, and I'm spending half of my time in the US and half of my time here, and everything's going fantastic. And then I get a call from my father, and he's dying. And I am the main person that would have to take care of him. My father lives in New York, and I'm here. So all of a sudden, that big entrepreneurial decision, which is my family, or do I keep going? And And for me, I made the decision that was right for me, which was I stopped everything and went to go take care of my father. Because I ran my business independently and I didn't have a business partner, I didn't have anybody to give the reins to. I explained everything to all of my artists, said we could pick things up later, went to the US, head down with Dad, spent the last few months with him. And then the day after his funeral, I had an accident while I was in the US and ended up losing the sight in my left eye after that accident. And the icing on the cake was that my travel insurance, I hadn't renewed it because Dad was dying. So my travel insurance was off. And the cost of going to doing medical in the US, it was over $200,000 to have the eye surgery. Oh, and the final icing on the cake was I couldn't travel because after the surgery I had something put in my eye to hold it in, a bubble.
I also had.
Oh, you had that,
Yeah. I
yeah.
had like 9 of them.
Yeah, so you know the bubble that they put
Yeah,
in.
it's so annoying.
Yeah, so I couldn't fly. And I had to move everything out of my father. I had to stand at a 90-degree angle for 23 hours a day, and which was great because when I had to pack up my dad's house, I had to be bent over anyway. So that was the positive side. But so everything changed, and then I did have to wear a patch for quite a while. Came back to the UK, and here I was. I'm back. I've just lost my best friend. I'm wearing a patch, so you talk about imposter syndrome. I felt like really insecure. I'm technically disabled at that point because my eyesight hadn't been fixed yet, and I had to make a decision as to like, am I going to be that person that's going to be out in the clubs every night or in the studio every night and hustling the way I've been hustling, or am I going to leave the industry and find something else, or am I going to stay in the industry and find something else? And I decided that I didn't want to throw away all of my career and that I would just find something that was going to be less intense. So I decided to consult and do other things that weren't putting as much pressure on me than was on me before. And I needed that time to recuperate and figure out who I was in this new incarnation. And somebody came up to me and said, the Music Managers Forum is looking for a GM, somebody to like run everything. And I was like, no, I don't want to get involved. That has nothing to do with me. There's nobody in that organization that is like me. I thought it was just a bunch of old white men. And this was after George Floyd, and I said, this is obviously you're coming to me because you want to find a Black woman to tick that box. And they were like, no, we want somebody that has experience to be able to share that experience, with the next generation of managers. And at this point, like, me sharing information with the next generation was always like was a transaction. It was a way for me to make money. And I never thought of doing it because it's the right thing to do. And I never felt that, getting motivation from sharing information. And I had never spoken publicly until I had gone to the MMF. I'd never spoken to young people. I was always dealing with people that were already in the industry. I'd never shared any knowledge, and I never understood the value of that until that happened. And had a wonderful time there, did so many things, learned about how there are ways to make changes that impact on a bigger level. So working with UK music, I was one of the only, not only one of the only women, but I was definitely one of the only people. I was the only person of color in a lot of these tables. We set up CISA, which is Creative Industries Independent Standards Authority Against Bullying, Harassment, and Discrimination. I wrote the Digital Burnout Report, and that was, we worked with TikTok, YouTube, and Spotify, and a lot of other online and digital platforms to talk about how it was affecting artists and executives and the teams, and how we could try to stop making digital burnout an issue that compromises people and causes people to leave their careers. And was on the diversity task force, did all of these wonderful things that are important to me now and still are important to me now. And it's another way of using the knowledge within the industry to affect other people. Because you get to a certain point where you're like, everybody says, oh, those are great stories, you've done a lot, that's really great. But then it's like, you don't get as satisfied with it anymore. And it's like, what is next? Because you're always looking for the next. And I found like great satisfaction in understanding that the next is being able to affect people, and like to have somebody like Yaz call me and say, can you come up and speak to a bunch of young people because I'm still thinking about what you said 3 years ago. I get as much of a thrill out of that than somebody calling and saying, you know, I've got an opening slot with Post Malone or something, right? So, you know, it's like you can get satisfaction from giving back. So where I am now is that I am still doing a lot of consulting. One of the things I wanted to do on my bucket list was to do a film. So I ended up working with a friend of mine as a producer for a hip hop film called Mixtape, the movie. I'll show the trailer a little bit later. But it talks about the story of how my generation made money without the record labels and how they hustled to make things happen. And I'm from the hustle generation. So, but I think that your generation, the generation that's now, is the hustle generation, because Instagram made everything, gave a global platform. When I did it, it was like you didn't have a way to reach everybody at a press of a button or at a tap of a button. You had to actually really get out there and not only be prepared, but have, like I said, delusional self-belief. And that's what I wanted to talk about. And that has to do with resilience and sustainability. And you want to go to the next slide? And so despite everything that's happened in my career, there's been so much change going on right now. Record labels are completely changing right now. They're turning into something called artist services, which means that they are working with more and more independent artists, and they will provide a service to you as opposed to doing all of the nuts and bolts work. And that's why I asked you about if you consider yourself entrepreneurs. And what that means is that a lot of the stuff is going to fall on the artist and on their teams. And the record labels are still going to get a skim, but they're going to get less of a skim. But it's actually the best time to be an artist, because instead of losing 80% of your revenue, you're going to be able to keep more. And if you look at what's going on in the global charts, I think like 50% is independent at the moment. It's something super high, which is why the record labels, like super quickly, like we're talking about in like months, have all of a sudden said, okay, we're going to be doing artist services, which is another reason why they're letting go with all of these creative people and all of these marketing people, because they're not going to be doing the creative and the marketing. They're just going to be doing what they're good at, which is actually getting things to scale and spreading things out in a bigger way. And there's always a need for that when the time is right. But what I have discovered through all of this long journey is, you know, what motivates an artist and what is an artist's definition of success. And this is what I've noticed, and you might totally disagree because you guys are the artists, but I've noticed fulfillment in work, creative expression, the ability to connect with your audience emotionally, and to stay true to your artistic vision regardless of the mainstream trends. Artists are motivated by having audience engagement. That's through online or through their live shows. Artists are motivated by financial stability, aren't we all? Everybody is motivated by that. Making cultural impact. Doesn't everybody want to be remembered by the next generation or to do something that goes beyond your sphere of influence within your immediate surroundings? And the sixth one is longevity and evolution. And that's what I wanted to really tap into, is longevity and evolution. And what does that mean? Because when you make the decision to go into the music industry, and when you make the decision to be an artist, first of all, the logic, there's people in my family that were like scratching my head and saying, you know, what are you doing? Are you crazy? My sister's a doctor, my other cousin's a lawyer. What are you doing? Why are you doing this? It doesn't make any sense. It's a calling, but it's a necessity for the world. And I would sit there with my dad and I would say, yeah, my sister's a doctor and she's really important. She saves lives, but artists save souls. And I think that is so important, because when people are at the lowest in their lives, when they've lost all hope, a song can come on a radio and can stop somebody from making a permanent decision about a temporary problem. Music can shift culture and can save lives. And this is the reason why I'm motivated every day to like wake up and try to stop the problem that we're noticing. And the problem that we're noticing is that people are giving up before they've even gotten started, or they're not thinking straight about what is success and what could my role be in this industry. Or they have an idea like, I've started off as an artist or a producer, and if I haven't achieved it, well, my career is over, I'm a failure, I'm getting out. No, there's other things you can do, and they're just as important and just as valuable, and things grow and things are constantly changing. But the idea is the passion for the music. And once you've signed, you know, that's what they say, like, they always have these stories about like selling your soul to the devil, because it doesn't make any sense to anybody else, but it makes sense to you because you're doing it. And the fact that you're giving your time and sitting here in this room means that you've already got it. And once you get it, anything else that you do, you're always going to be missing it. And even when you try to get out, you're always going to want to try to find a way to get back in, because there is nothing more satisfying and more motivating than to be able to do what you love, work with people that you like, and to be able to support yourself and find a way, and you will find a way. And you know, I wanted to tell my story because my story shows a way of things aren't always straight, things go wrong. When you think that everything's going right, the rug will be, you know, pulled out from under you. That is without any hesitation, that will happen. But you will find a way, you will fall down, you will pick yourself up, and you'll move forward. Because artists and people within the creative industries are the smartest, most resilient people in the world, and they always figure it out. Another thing that I found was throughout all the changes within the whole industry, authenticity remains a significant currency. Authenticity is the winner. So it might not make sense to anybody else what you're doing, but if it makes sense to you and you believe in it and you have the resilience, you know, it's the different things that break through. Wu-Tang, when they came out, their music didn't sound like anybody else's music. A lot of people were like, what is this? When Public Enemy came out, what is this? It sounded like noise. When trip hop came out, trip hop, what is it? Where's Bristol? Who are these South Country? You know, but they were all authentic, you know. So it's about finding your unique point. Don't try to be like anybody else. If it doesn't make sense to anybody else, you're probably doing the right thing because it's not already out there. So it's like, what is the thing that's unique with you? And that's also a leap of faith. That's also like believing in something, even though everything around you can tell you that it doesn't make sense. But when you're doing something different, you will find your audience, and there's nobody else doing it. And believe me, the lane gets very uncongested when you're the only one. You know, so create authentic content. Artists who share their stories, they connect with their audience. People want to see your vulnerability. They want to hear your ups and downs. I'm sharing my ups and downs, but like that's what's interesting to people. Create live experiences that are not only memorable, but are immersive. Things that people can walk away from saying, wow, that was really interesting. I went to go see SAULT, S-A-U-L-T. They did an amazing immersive live experience they had never done a live show before. I think they had 5 albums. They just did it last year. It sold out at the drum sheds within minutes. And they had art installations, they had choirs, they had orchestras, they had catwalks, they had everything that you could think of. People are still talking about it today and are waiting for the next ones. There's lots of different ways that you can create unique live experiences, and they don't always have to be in real life. They can be online, they could be using virtual reality, they could be using technology. Collaborating and networking is a fantastic way to not only tap into somebody else's audience, but also learn new things. So that never stops. Embracing new technology. New technology is changing every single day, but you need to stay on top of it. And how do you stay on top of it? Read all of the trade organization newsletters, read Music Week, read Music Ally. You need to be on top of new technology. New technology is nothing to be afraid of. It will make your life easier in the long run. How many of you are using AI to help you write things, and you will use AI to when she was talking about doing syncs, a lot of artists I know, they have huge catalogs, but they don't have time to go looking through everything. So they use technology to say, this commercial is looking for something that is dreamy, what would be classified as dreamy. They get a sample of it and then they can pull it out of their library. So there's lots of new things. And then continuous learning and adaptation. I am still learning every day. I was sitting here listening to her speak, and I'm learning and writing things down. You never stop learning. You have to always be out there finding out what the best practices are, taking online courses. Like I said before, everything that you knew yesterday is not going to be relevant today or tomorrow. You constantly have to be learning and evolving. So can you go to the next one, please? And resilience. And this is a soft skill that people don't talk about enough. And that's the importance of coming back from a setback, getting back up, and continuing. And I can't say this enough. It's like when you fall down, it's so easy to stay down. It's so easy to give up. But you have to pull yourself up, and you have to develop that resilience almost as much as anything else. And you're going to find that a lot of times we're worried about what other people are thinking. Number one, everybody else is trying to make it just like you. So people aren't thinking about us as much as we think they are, number one. And number two, nobody really remembers the fall as much as they remember the comeback. Whenever you think everything is going great, everything that comes up comes down. You'll have a record deal that was working fine, and then it won't be working fine, and that's okay, and you move on and you find the next one. You'll have a team that is working fantastic for you at this moment, but you're constantly changing, they're constantly changing, the world is constantly changing, and that team you might need to move on, and you might be teamless for a little while, but eventually you'll find a new team. You might have a deal that was everything that you thought it would be, and then you get a call and they say, well, we've changed our mind. We don't want to work with you anymore. And these things happen all the time. But number one, you don't hear about them. No one's going to talk about them. And number two, you just keep going. And that's when I say, when people say to me, what is the most important lesson you've learned in this industry? And it's the lesson of resilience, and a lesson that we always look at everything through a lens of successes that we consider successes, but we don't realize that the failures are always a part of that success as well, because for every one Grammy win that you see, there's 1,000 failures behind that. And nobody talks about that. Nobody shares that. But it's the reality of the industry. But you keep on going, you figure it out, you develop a hard skin, and that's That's the ruthlessness of an artist, and it's not a bad thing. It's a survival thing. Can we go to the next? Oh, yes.
What would happen if, for example, you've got this goal and resilience, and you're saying, yeah, this is what I want to be, and then you finally get there and realize it isn't really what you thought it was going to be like?
That happens all the time because, the reality is you're constantly evolving as a human being. And what you wanted at maybe 10 years ago isn't necessarily going to be what you want today. Because I would have thought I'll do anything for my business. I'll never walk away from my business. But then when you realize that the person that is your family needs you, that changes. Whereas probably, I don't know if that's a decision I would have made 10 or 15 years beforehand, right? But it's you're constantly changing. And also what Biggie used to say, more money, more problems. The most unhappy people I know are the richest people. I know several billionaires. They are the most unhappy, miserable people I know. Why? Because once you reach a certain point,
money doesn't bring happiness.
Money does not bring happiness at all. That exactly.
And where next?
Where next? Where next? And when, let's talk about our friend Diddy. Did he not have it all? But did he not have it all? No pun intended, right? But it's where does where does it end? You always want more.
When is enough enough?
When is enough enough? And that's where you need to find, there's a slide that's going to say that's where you need to find another motivation. And that's what I wanted to have this conversation about. Because if you had said to me years ago when I was flying around and doing all of these 90 and naughty 00 excessive things, that I would find satisfaction talking to people at the beginning of the career, maybe I wouldn't have realized it. But the reality is, what is important is what you leave behind. Because you have a shelf life. And yeah, we all do. And it's but the important thing is the seeds that you plant for the next generation. And that's something that comes with maturity. But everything that you do in this world as a musician is inspiring and setting up the next generation. And even if you just inspire 5 people, that's worth it. Because it's it has to be bigger than you. Or else, isn't that the reason why we do it? To connect with an audience, to leave an impact in the world. And that's the power of music and creativity. Sustainability. So the art of longevity, striving and surviving. I mean, this was just what I wanted to have a longer conversation about, which was the reality is, yes, it's important, but we need to survive. But there's ways to survive and make money. There's ways to still stay true to your music and bring in an income, but you need to figure out ways to bring in income. And as she mentioned, streaming isn't going to be the way to do it. So how do we make income? We make income through merchandising, through doing partners, through setting up YouTube channels, through telling our stories. If you're going, I started my management company. I had a full-time job, but then I was up all night setting up my management company in the beginning. And my full-time job was in music. So the people that I was meeting during the day, I would use them for setting up my business. Everything that I've ever done work-wise, because it's nice to have that regular check, let's be honest, has been in music so that I can use it in furthering my career. And there's nothing wrong with that either. A lot of people I know, they have regular jobs. And that's okay, but the regular jobs are still within music, and the regular jobs will still give them the freedom to have the meetings that they have to have, or if they need to come in a little bit late because they had an all-night session, they're going to maybe understand that. But it's also going to open up other doors and avenues for people that will help them further their career or their businesses. Next slide. I need to look at the top. Oh, I'm still talking. So independence and collaboration. Another thing I wanted to quickly talk about was that's the big decision that you as business people are, and let's face it, all artists are business people. You're going to have to come to a point where you're going to have to decide, am I going to still do this independently, or am I going to collaborate with somebody? My experience is I had always wanted to do stuff independently. That's how I chose to do it, but there is power in collaboration, because when you need to take care of yourself, when something happens to you health-wise, it's nice to have somebody else on the side and somebody to hand it to, somebody to lean on. Collaboration could also mean network. Collaboration could also mean joining organizations within the music industry. Collaboration could also mean, collaboration could also mean having a manager. Managers nowadays are more business partners. Most of the deals that I do now, if I'm working with artists, it will be setting up a business. The reason why I decided to do that was because a business is easier to navigate than a management contract, and I felt that I needed more than the 20%, and we're building something together. And you could create businesses with your managers, and a lot of managers and artists do that. Tiny Temper has a business with his team. They have a recording studio, they have a publishing company, they look after other artists, they have a TV company, they have a fashion company, and it's a partnership with his team. They run the business together. So that's a big thing that you need to look at. And it's also when you get to the point where you can't be creative and run your business at the same time, and you're losing opportunity and you're losing money because you don't have the time, that's when you need to think about, how am I going to solve this problem? Is it time for me to partner with a manager? Is it time for me to partner with a team? Is it time for me to look for a deal that can put money in my pocket so that I can hire people to work with me? So that's another important business-minded thing to think about. And the next slide. Redefining success. I'm hoping the goal of this was that at the beginning of this, when I asked you what was success, I was hoping that some of you would say, like, private jets, popping bottles. And I'm hoping at the end of it, redefining success, you've had a chance to think about it. Because at the end of the day, you need to be happy with what you're doing, and you need to realize, you need to celebrate your wins. So celebrating your growth is how you can stay in this business. It's anything that you do, every single day that you wake up and you're an artist is a win. And you need to look at yourself in the mirror and say, I'm doing this for another day. Thank you for the inspiration, whoever you're thanking, whether it's, whatever you believe in, whoever you're thanking. Every single day that you're here doing it, that's a win. And you need to learn how to celebrate that, because that's how you grow and that's how you remain happy. The biggest source of unhappiness is comparing yourself to other people. That's why I love social media, but I hate social media, because we are constantly comparing ourselves. The most successful artists I know don't even pay any attention to anybody else. They are just only focused on themselves. And you need to just keep going that way. And the final slide. Choose success in the music industry. So what have I, in my long, very seasoned career, found out? Fulfillment is achieving success by your own definition, not by anybody else's, what your own definition is. And true success in music is not only measured by fame and fortune, but it's measured by the resilience and what we had to go through setbacks, the partnerships we made that lift us up with others, and the lessons that we've learned and shared, and what we will leave on to the industry and those that come after us. And I think that that's the last slide. So, that went quick.